All the hype, all the rush. After the NES Classic's low production run drove people mad trying to get one, the SNES Classic came with a lot more hysteria trying to get a hold of the tiny retro console. Don't ask me how I got one, though I would like to give a shout out to Baron Samedi, the local voodoo priest, for no particular reason. So let's see if this is worth the rush, typically reserved for new iPhones. Before we begin, if you clicked on this to see if it's worth the eBay markup, don't buy it. Nintendo has stated they're making a bunch more of these, and with the news that the NES Classic is getting another run, you should eventually be able to get one for retail price. Do not feed the scalpers. We start with the physical. The SNES Classic is a tiny replica of the original 16-bit console, and when I say tiny, I mean just over 5 inches long. The detail is immaculate, right down to the weird wavy pattern on the base. All the letter printing is in scale and replicated. All of the creases are accounted for. It's so accurate, I'm half convinced the plastic will eventually yellow on me. Only necessary changes have been made, like the ports in the back for HDMI and micro USB power, meaning it's easy to get longer cords for this thing. For the sake of completion, the dust door and eject button don't do anything, but besides that, it's a very faithful recreation. The controllers are the same story, with the shapes, colors, and printing recreated from the original, but these are full size. Again, few things are different. For the controller, the L and R buttons have sculpted marks instead of printed letters, and the plastic itself has a texture to it now. It's not as slick, which will help those with sweaty hands. You know, the ones you never wanted to pass a controller with as a kid. Otherwise, it feels like the original controller, maybe better with the improvements to tech since 1991. In an improvement over the NES Classic, controller cables are now 4.5 feet long. It still feels kinda short, but the upside is you actually get 2 controllers out of the box now. They don't plug into the molded ports on front, instead it's a panel that comes off and reveals the real ports, the same kind Nintendo's been using since the Wii. So that's the hardware, let's go to software now. The system wastes no time, dropping you into the game list immediately, with no real heads up of how to use the system's features. Luckily, it's easy to figure out, and easier to let some schmuck from the internet tell you about it. The games are sorted alphabetically by default, but Select lets you sort them by release year, publisher, even your most recently played. At the top, you get options. The first is display settings, starting with frames to fill out all the space an SNES never predicted a TV would have. There's some neat ones here, including a few that change color as you play, but I feel like it would have been easy to have a lot more. Some games don't really have borders that suit them, some borders don't have games that suit them. It's a minor detail, but I feel like some fun could have been had with it. You'll likely find one you like well enough and never bother changing it. Then you have 3 modes to pick from. 4x3 stretches the pixels to match the resolution of an old TV, and it's what I'm using for most of this video. Pixel Perfect is what it sounds like, exact pixels that might make graphics seem thinner than your nostalgia remembers. Then there's CRT, 4x3 with a filter that makes it look like it's being played on an old TV. Your mileage may vary with this one. To record this footage, I hooked up a spare 23-inch I have, and the effect looks great. This is the mode that makes me feel like I'm playing the same games I did from childhood. But on my usual 50-inch, I got a lot of artifacts with this setting that looked bad, so it might not work for everyone. In options, you get standard things like burn-in reduction, system reset, but the 2 demo options are weird. If the system is idle on the menu, Mario and Luigi will start triggering demos of the games, and even changing display settings. It changes back once you hit any button though. You can turn this on or off, or set it to use your saved gameplay as the demo. You also get basics like language selection, legal info, and a QR code that takes your smartphone to a list of all the original manuals for these games in PDF format. Not a bad idea to include. The signature feature of the system is Rewind. Hitting the reset button on the console will take you back to the menu, where you can save your current position in the game. Up to 4 saves like this can be made, letting you pick up where you left off, or giving you a bit of safety before trying something reckless. If that reckless move goes wrong, you can also rewind the save state to correct errors or just practice a particular part of a game. How far back you can go varies by game, with RPGs being far more generous. Yes, it's Nintendo branded save scumming, but how else are you supposed to beat ghouls and ghosts without a game genie? This does mean the console has to be close by to keep the reset button in reach, so you might need a longer HDMI cable than this comes with. Now, a lot watching might not be old enough to remember these games, so I'll run them down for you. I'll be brief about it, cause really, people have been talking about these games for 20 years now. Plenty of opinions out there to collect. Super Mario World. Leave it to Nintendo to make the SNES's first game one of its best ever. This is the game that introduced Yoshi, Boo Houses, reserve items, and a lot of other elements that still come up in Mario games today. The cartoony graphics were a great upgrade from the NES days, and the soundtrack is memorable. These days it probably seems too easy, but with almost 100 levels to beat, lots of secrets to find, and plenty of level variety, it's got many hours of gameplay to be had. F-Zero. The Super Nintendo's Mode 7 graphics seem made for race games, and this was the fastest around. Few games were ever this good at capturing the feeling of high speed, no blast processing needed. It's challenging as well. It's not long into the game before you have to learn the drift and brake controls to make turns, and with precious few chances to recharge, your car takes a beating fast. It's a fun game to pick up when you don't have much time to game, but expect to spend a good while mastering it. Super Ghouls and Ghosts. The first franchise where the difficulty level had to be described with profanity. Don't let the spooky graphics or goofy looking knight fool you. This game is a merciless platformer with big bosses, cheap enemies, and one of the cruelest twists in the history of classic gaming. Fans of indie platformers on Steam will probably eat this up, and someone discovering it for the first time will probably call it the Dark Souls of the SNES unironically. Super Castlevania 4. You might be able to call this the first HD remake, even though HD wasn't a thing yet. A remake of the original Castlevania, even though they numbered it 4, it adds a lot of new features and did some great tricks with the Mode 7 functions to create some really neat levels for the time. This is another challenging one, but not Ghouls and Ghosts bad, and with a stronger atmosphere with its creepier graphics and music, perfect for a Halloween night. Contra 3: The Alien Wars. The original shoot-'em-up series and still a blast to play. Charging through the levels with massive guns blazing has always been fun, especially here where the bosses are bigger and freakier. It still boasts a great weapon set, including a fire weapon that doesn't do the stupid loop thing, and some new features to deal more damage. The top-down levels don't age well though, and it's on the short side, but it's a great game to turn on for an afternoon. The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. One of the legendary titles of the SNES, the third Zelda game holds up to time very well. A princess named Zelda is captured again, and a boy who really likes green once again ventures to save her. This has always been a great title for exploring, lots of secrets to find, challenging dungeons, and the light and dark world gimmick of the game creates some clever puzzles. There's a lot of life in this game, and it's highly regarded for good reason. Super Mario Kart. Who knew this goofball title would spawn an entire genre? Once again, Mode 7 is made for racing games as Mario and friends, and enemies, kart around launching shells at each other. Back then, the computer's outright cheating was all the more obvious, and at 150cc, it's cruel. But at least there's no blue shell, and at least this has the classic battle mode that's as fun to play with friends as it's always been. Simple compared to modern games, but still a blast. Star Fox. The Lilat system is under attack. Their only hope is Fox, his wingmen, and the frog they have to keep saving. I'm not gonna split hairs here, the visuals have not aged well, but for 1993 this was revolutionary, all thanks to the Super FX chip. Luckily it's Nintendo, so the gameplay is still solid, as is the soundtrack, which is appropriately space age, but many will have a hard time with the old polygons and the low frame rate. Street Fighter II Turbo. The follow-up to the SNES's first major third-party exclusive. It's where Capcom first started selling upgrades of the same game. Boasting playable bosses, new moves, more arcade-accurate endings and audio, plus faster gameplay modes, this was the fighting game to have on the Super Nintendo. Until Super Street Fighter II came out. but the extra options and more familiar presentation I think make it a more nostalgic and interesting inclusion even without being super. Secret of Mana. Squaresoft was the only company that knew how to work the Super Nintendo better than Nintendo did. This wasn't your typical RPG, no overworld map, no turn-based combat, action happens on the spot, like a precursor to Kingdom Hearts. The story's kind of cookie-cutter, but the gameplay is excellent, with a unique magic and weapon swapping system. Throw in one of Squaresoft's signature soundtracks and you have one of gaming's original masterpieces. Mega Man X. Possibly my favorite of all Mega Man games, X brought the classic gameplay style into the 90s with a more serious story, more complex character designs, and wow, what a soundtrack! The game boasted a lot of new features, armor and upgrades to find, charging up special weapons, even things as basic as wall jumping and dashing gave the game a totally different feel. Not the most challenging or longest game, but a lot of fun while it lasts. Super Metroid. The game that created speedrunning. Samus must return to planet Zebes to retrieve the final Metroid, stop the pirates, and possibly detonate the planet for funsies on the way out. This is the game that spawned modern Metroidvania-style games. There's a ton of secrets to find, huge bosses to fight, and lots of challenges across the huge map. It's topped off with graphics and music that does atmosphere better than any 16-bit game. Truly a legendary title. Super Punch-Out. The only franchise that seems to be able to make a compelling boxing game. It can be easily written off as a simple fighter, but it's more about learning your opponent's tells, how to avoid their moves, and the best way to counterattack. In that sense, I compare it more to Monster Hunter, and like that game, the more you figure out an opponent, the more satisfying it is when you crush them. A great one to pick up and play anytime, but a task to master. Final Fantasy III. How can I praise this game any more than I already have? A masterpiece from top to bottom. This massive RPG boasts some of the SNES's nicest graphics, arguably its best soundtrack, and a great story with compelling characters. It might not have the updated translation or the new features of the modern releases, but the old script has a lot of charm to it, and it's fun to go back and see again. This game alone might take weeks away from you, and it will be worth it. Donkey Kong Country. Rare used to be amazing at video games, and this is where people found that out. A platform reimagining of Nintendo's first franchise, the game was made with pre-rendered sprites that had details and animation better than anything seen at the time. Even today, the visuals are still nice to look at, and stands out amongst the huge library of SNES platformers. It's another challenging one, so gameplay-wise it should find a new audience with this release. Kirby's Dream Course. I still have no idea how to categorize this game. Kirby's first spin-off title is a weird mix. The gameplay functions like you're playing pool, but on what's essentially a mini-golf course littered with enemies to beat before the hole even shows up. It's a bizarre but fun game if you're in the mood for something slower paced, but it's the two-player mode where the game really shines. I'm convinced this game is why the US release got 2 controllers in the box. Earthbound. Nintendo's first homegrown RPG. That was released outside of Japan anyway. This is the SNES cult classic, finding little audience at launch but growing into a highly regarded game. It features a lot of classic RPG elements, but no random encounters gives it a different vibe from other games, as does the cartoonish graphics and darker elements as you get towards the end. It might not be as approachable as a Final Fantasy, but it's worth it for the change of pace. Super Mario World 2: Yoshi's Island. Talk about cartoony graphics. A prequel to Super Mario World, this game is downright storybook in art design. One of the few games powered by the Super FX2 chip, it boasts some really impressive visuals for its time, including large bosses with dynamic movement and one of the largest boss battles on the SNES, period. The baby saving mechanic will make or break this game for you, but if you can handle that, you're in for a fun trip through Mario's past. Super Mario RPG: Legend of the Seven Stars. 3 for 3 with Squaresoft's amazing RPGs on this system. Featuring pre-rendered graphics that gave it a unique and amazing look for the system, it perfectly blended the traditional elements of the Mario franchise with the design of a turn-based RPG. The storyline is one of Mario's best, and we get to see some really cool characterization from the likes of Princess and Bowser for the first time, and it has a great original cast. A must-play if you haven't already. Kirby Superstar. Billing itself as an 8-in-1 game, this is an all-in-one package. It features a simplified remake of the original Kirby, a few modes that could be their own games, albeit short, and numerous other modes that vary gameplay without breaking Kirby's usual moveset. Instead, the modes find ways of using them for other styles of games, racing, treasure hunting, and the like. There's plenty to do in this title, and Kirby's always been an easy game for anyone to pick up and play. And then there's the game I can't keep to just 30 seconds because it's the one that didn't officially come out until now. Star Fox 2 is the long-lost sequel of the original Star Fox, and the most infamous unfinished Nintendo title. At least 90% done when cancelled, it was shelved due to Nintendo not wanting to release a game for the SNES when the N64 was right around the corner, preferring to save Star Fox for the new system. For the SNES Classic, Nintendo put the final polish on the game and officially released it, making it the final Super Nintendo game to hit retail over 2 decades after the death of the system. Once again, you're playing as Fox McCloud and his team of pilots to stop an attack from Andross. This time though, you have 6 pilots, our usual crew plus newcomers, Miyu and Faye, and can play as any one of them, with another acting as wingman. Each R-Wing now has slightly different designs and different stats to suit your gameplay style. Speaking of the gameplay, it's also very different now, with more real-time strategy elements. Attacks from missiles and fighters will advance on Corneria. You can intercept or advance toward enemy bases to stop more attacks from coming. When a base is beaten, you can move your mothership there. Visiting the mothership lets you recharge shields and quickly warp between freed planets, so keeping it close by is important. You'll also have to contend with bosses and Star Wolf members emerging to give you a harder fight. Time is a big factor. Even during a mission, events will still play out, so beating areas must be done quickly before Corneria takes too much damage. It's a huge change, even though the core gameplay still feels like the original Star Fox, though I do find myself in first-person view more than I'd like due to the emphasis on space combat. Some missions also let you go between flight and walker modes. I remember a lot liking the idea of a transforming R-Wing, but the result is awkward. It can move in all directions with the D-pad and turns with the shoulder buttons. It even jumps. Its main purpose is to stand on switches and enter enemy bases where the R-Wing can't fly, but should you want to fly, you can transform to and from any time. Personally though, I'd rather just fly the R-Wing. Overall, it's a fun game and feels enough like Star Fox, but the time system adds pressure I don't like, and some of the charm of the original is missing here. Weird thing though, you can't play it out of the box without beating the first level of Star Fox first. Not really sure why, it's the only thing unlockable on the system. All in all, 21 classic titles, all for their own reasons. If someone told me this was their list of favorite SNES games, I couldn't argue it. But I could argue what's missing, though I can think of good reasons. The big one is Super Mario All-Stars, but there's no way Nintendo is going to undercut the NES Classics library by including 3 of its games upgraded on another system, especially pending the NES Classics reissue. Earthworm Jim and Mega Man 7 come up a lot, but the system is already loaded with some of the best platformers, so some had to be dropped. For similar reason, we're missing Chrono Trigger, Final Fantasy II, and Secret of Evermore. FF3 and Mario RPG had to be on there, but 3 Square RPGs is already a lot. I can see Mana getting the nod because it's better remembered than Evermore, and it avoids a 4th turn-based RPG for the system, which is the only reason I can see for leaving off Chrono Trigger. Though it could also have been for a licensing cost thing. That's why there's no Turtles in Time or NBA Jam. Thank you Nickelodeon and 2K Sports. Same reason for no Killer Instinct. Good luck getting Microsoft to sign off on that. though that would have given the Super Nintendo Classic an M rating. Do you really think Nintendo wants to keep kids from buying this? That means Doom and any Mortal Kombat are also out. Only 2 titles come to mind that could have been on this system with no conflicts of genre or extra companies to deal with: Pilot Wings and Final Fight. Both would have given a variety boost to the lineup, and they are solid, well-remembered titles. I might have picked them over Dream Course or Ghouls and Ghosts, but I can't deny those two do add different elements to the lineup. Ultimately though, it is a hard lineup to argue, and it makes for an amazing set of games in one $80 bundle. Just think, back in the Super Nintendo era, a high-memory game like Chrono Trigger could run you that much just for one game. Chalk the price up to Star Fox 2, and you're basically getting a console and 20 all-star titles for free. The system itself feels good, all the nostalgia I want, with plenty of improvements along the way. Like I expect from Nintendo, nothing feels cheap or cheaty. Except maybe the cord length. Definitely a worthwhile purchase for those wanting to experience some retro games, or replay some old favorites as close to the originals as you can get. Just please, do not give in to the scalpers. Baron Samedi gave me a voodoo doll for anyone who does, so this is fair warning.